What if everything you knew, your home, your family, your entire life, had to be left behind because of a voice you heard? What if that voice promised you would become the father of nations, yet you had no children? What if you were asked to sacrifice the very son that voice promised you? This is not fiction. This is the story of one man whose faith changed the course of human history forever. His name was Abraham, and he is called the father of faith by billions of people across three major world religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But before he was Abraham, he was just Abram, a man living in a land of idol worship, surrounded by false gods and empty promises. Then one day, the one true God spoke, and nothing would ever be the same. This is a story of impossible promises, dangerous journeys, and tests that would break most people. It's about a man who lied to save his life, who took matters into his own hands when faith seemed foolish, and who faced the ultimate test that no parent should ever face. Yet through it all, he became the most remarkable example of faith the world has ever known. Get ready to witness the incredible story of Abraham, the father of nations. Long ago, in a place called Ur of the Chaldeans, there lived a man named Abram. Ur was one of the most advanced cities in the ancient world, located in Mesopotamia near what we know today as Iraq. The city was wealthy and powerful, filled with merchants, craftsmen, and scholars. It was famous for its massive step towers called ziggurats, enormous structures that rose high into the sky where people climbed up to worship their gods. But these weren't real gods. They were just statues made of wood, stone, and metal that couldn't see, hear, or do anything at all. The people of Ur worshipped the moon god and countless other idols. They bowed down to lifeless objects, offered sacrifices to statues that couldn't respond, and built their entire society around serving gods that simply didn't exist. The streets were filled with religious processions, the air thick with incense burned to idols, and the culture completely saturated with false worship. Abram's father was named Terah, and Scripture tells us something important about his family background. In Joshua chapter 24, verse 2, we read, "Joshua said to all the people, 'This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River and worshipped other gods.'" So Abram didn't grow up in a godly home. His own father participated in the idol worship that dominated Ur. Every day, he saw people bowing to statues, priests performing elaborate rituals to false gods, and temples filled with images people treated as divine beings. This was all he knew, the culture he breathed, the religion of his family, the normal, everyday life of Ur. But something was different about Abram. While everyone around him bowed to lifeless statues that never spoke or moved, Abram sensed there was something more, something real, something true beyond these empty rituals. The living God who created everything was watching Abram and was about to break into his life in a way that would change human history forever. One day, in the middle of Abram's ordinary life, something extraordinary happened. The Lord himself spoke directly to Abram. In Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, we read exactly what God said. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." Think about how incredible this moment was. Abram had spent his whole life surrounded by silent idols that never spoke, never moved, never responded to anyone, no matter how desperately people prayed. People would stand before these statues for hours, crying out for answers, but the idols just stood there, cold and lifeless. But now Abram was hearing something completely different, the voice of the living God. Not a statue, not an idol, but God himself speaking directly, personally, unmistakably. The God who created the universe was having a conversation with one man. And what did God ask? Leave everything. Go from your country. Leave the land where you were born, the place you call home, your people. Leave your relatives, your community, everyone you've known. your father's household, leave the family business, your inheritance, your security, and go where? God didn't give Abram a map. He simply said, to the land I will show you. You're going somewhere, Abram, but I'm not telling you exactly where. You have to start walking before you can see the destination. You have to trust me enough to take the first step. This wasn't a small request. In Abram's time, your country, your people, and your father's household were everything. They defined who you were, provided your security, and gave you your place in the world. To leave all three meant becoming nobody, losing your entire identity and starting completely over. And there's another crucial detail. Abram wasn't a young man looking for adventure. We learn later that Abram was 75 years old when he set out. 75. Most people at that age would be settling down, not starting a massive journey into complete uncertainty. But when the Creator calls you, everything changes. This was the same voice that spoke stars into existence, and now it was inviting one man into a relationship that would span all generations. God didn't just tell Abram to leave without giving him any reason or hope. He made 7 incredible promises that seemed absolutely impossible for a childless 75-year-old man. In Genesis chapter 12, verses 2 and 3, God laid out his promises. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Let's count these promises carefully. First, I will make you into a great nation. A nation means thousands, even millions of people, armies, cities, culture, and influence. But Abram had no children, not even one. His wife Sarai was barren. How could this be possible? Second, I will bless you. God would personally pour favor on Abram's life, protect him, provide for him, and make everything he did successful. Third, I will make your name great. Abram's name would be remembered and honored throughout all of history. People thousands of years later would still know who he was. Fourth, you will be a blessing. Abram wouldn't just receive blessings, he would become a source of blessing to others. His life would make other people's lives better. Fifth, I will bless those who bless you. Anyone who treated Abram well would receive God's favor in return. Supporting Abram meant getting God's attention in a positive way. Sixth, whoever curses you, I will curse. Anyone who tried to harm Abram would face God's judgment. God was putting his own reputation on the line to protect this one man. And seventh, the most staggering promise, all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Not just Abram's family or future nation, but every tribe, every race, every nation on the entire planet would somehow receive a blessing through his family line. This promise reached far beyond anything Abram could understand. These were covenant promises from God himself, permanent, unbreakable commitments, but they required faith. Abram couldn't see any evidence yet. He had no children, no land, no nation, no great name. He just had God's word. He had to choose, stay in comfortable Ur, or trust this voice and step into the unknown, believing God would do the impossible. Abram made his decision. He chose faith. Genesis chapter 12 verse 4 tells us, so Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. Wait, Haran? Wasn't he supposed to leave from Ur? Here's what happened. Abram's father, Terah, had actually started a journey from Ur toward Canaan, but stopped halfway at Haran and settled there instead of completing the trip. Genesis chapter 11 verses 31 and 32 explain, Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. Terah lived 205 years, and he died in Haran. So after his father died in Haran, Abram, now 75 years old, completed the journey that had been left unfinished. This time, he wasn't following his father. He was following God directly. Genesis chapter 12 verse 5 gives us the full picture. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. This was a massive caravan. They had possessions, tents, supplies, tools, household items. They had people, servants and workers who were part of their household. They had flocks and herds, sheep, goats, cattle, donkeys providing milk, meat, wool and transportation. Moving all of this was like relocating an entire village. Abram was leaving civilization behind to become a wanderer with no permanent home. He was trading houses for tents, cities for open fields, security for uncertainty. Every step took him farther from everything familiar and closer to something he couldn't yet see, a promise from God that seemed impossible, but which Abram chose to believe. After years of delay in Haran, Abram was now walking fully in obedience to God's call. When Abram arrived in Canaan, he didn't stop at the border. He kept traveling through the land, exploring this place God had promised. Genesis chapter 12 verse 6 tells us, Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. Shechem was in the heart of Canaan, in a valley between two mountains. The great tree of Moreh was a well-known landmark where people gathered, but notice the crucial detail. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. This wasn't empty territory. People already lived here with cities, farms, armies, and their own pagan gods. They weren't going to hand over their land to a nomad, claiming God promised it to him. God's promise would require even more faith. Then, something powerful happened. Genesis chapter 12 verse 7 says, "The Lord appeared to Abram and said, 'To your offspring I will give this land.' So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him." God appeared to Abram. The text doesn't explain exactly how, but Abram knew without any doubt that God was there with him, and God made his promise even more specific. "To your offspring I will give this land. Your descendants will own everything you see right now. Not maybe, not possibly, will give." It was certain, decided, done in God's eyes, even though it hadn't happened yet in time. Even though Abram had no children, even though the Canaanites lived here with their established civilization, God declared it an absolute certainty. In God's eyes, the land already belonged to Abram's future family. This was an overwhelming confirmation that yes, this is the place, this is where your future lies. Right there at Shechem, where God appeared and spoke these promises, Abram built an altar. Genesis chapter 12 verse 7 tells us, "So he built an altar there to the Lord, who had appeared to him." An altar was a worship place made by stacking stones together, where people offered sacrifices to God. By building this altar, Abram was honoring God for appearing to him, marking this spot as a place where he encountered the living God and making a public statement. "The true God has spoken to me here, and I worship him alone." But Abram didn't stop with just one altar. Genesis chapter 12 verse 8 says, "From there he went on toward the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord." Another altar, another place of worship. Notice what else the text says, "and called on the name of the Lord." Abram prayed out loud. He spoke to God. He worshipped audibly, perhaps with his household gathered around. In Canaan there were altars everywhere, but they were altars to false gods like Baal, Asherah, and Moloch. The Canaanites worshipped creation instead of the Creator, bowing to the sun, moon, and stars. Their worship involved horrible practices, including child sacrifice. But Abram's altars were different. They were to the one true God who had spoken to him personally. Each altar was like a spiritual flag planted in the ground, declaring, "The living God is real, and I worship him here." In a land dominated by darkness and false religion, Abram was bringing light and true worship. Then Genesis chapter 12 verse 9 says, "Then Abram set out and continued toward the Negev." The Negev was the southern desert region of Canaan. Abram became a nomad, moving his tents and flocks from place to place, but wherever he went, he worshipped God. These altars weren't just religious rituals, they were relationship markers. Each altar said, "God met me here, spoke to me here, is with me here." Abram was building his life around his relationship with God. Everything seemed to be going well. Abram had obeyed God, received direct confirmation, and was exploring the promised land. But then something unexpected and difficult happened. Genesis chapter 12 verse 10 tells us, "Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe." A famine, no rain fell, the crops failed, the grass dried up. There wasn't enough food for Abram's household or his flocks. This was a serious, life-threatening crisis. Abram had obeyed God and was now in the land God promised him, yet he faced starvation. Sometimes when we obey God, we expect everything to become easy, but that's not always how it works. Obedience doesn't guarantee the absence of challenges. The famine was severe, not a minor shortage, but a dangerous situation requiring immediate action. What should Abram do? He made a practical decision: go to Egypt temporarily until the famine passed. Egypt made sense. While Canaan depended entirely on seasonal rains for water, Egypt had the Nile River. Every year the Nile flooded and left behind rich soil perfect for farming. Egypt almost always had food when surrounding nations suffered from drought. For centuries, Egypt had been the place people went when food became scarce. The text says Abram went to live there for a while. This was temporary. He wasn't abandoning Canaan forever. He was making a short-term decision to survive a crisis. The Bible doesn't directly criticize Abram for going to Egypt. Sometimes faith means taking practical steps to survive difficult circumstances while continuing to trust God for the bigger picture. So Abram gathered his household, his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all his servants, his flocks, his possessions, and headed southwest toward Egypt. They were leaving the land of promise and entering a powerful pagan empire ruled by Pharaoh, who was considered a god by his people. Egypt was wealthy and sophisticated, but also dangerous for foreigners. As Abram's caravan traveled toward Egypt, fear began to grip his heart, and this fear led him to make a terrible decision. As Abram approached the border of Egypt with his wife Sarai, fear began to grip his heart and overwhelm his faith. He looked at his wife Sarai and couldn't stop worrying about one thing. She was beautiful. Even though they were both older, Abram was 75 and Sarai was 65, she was still a strikingly beautiful woman who would catch the attention of men wherever they went. And Abram knew exactly how powerful men operated in the ancient world. He knew that if a king or official desired a married woman, he might simply have her husband killed and take the woman for himself. Fear made Abram forget everything. Fear made him forget about the 7 promises God had made. Fear made him forget that God had appeared to him personally. Fear made him forget that God needed to keep him alive to fulfill those promises about making him a great nation. Fear pushed aside all his faith and replaced it with self-preservation and panic. Genesis chapter 12, verses 11 through 13, show us what Abram said to his wife. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, "I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' Then they will kill me, but will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake and my life will be spared because of you." Abram asked his wife to lie. He asked her to pretend she wasn't married to him. His reasoning seemed logical. If they know you're my wife, they'll kill me to take you, but if they think you're my sister, they'll let me live. This was about self-preservation. Abram was willing to put his wife in a vulnerable and dangerous position just to save his own life. How could God's promises come true if Sarai became another man's wife? The entire plan was at risk because of Abram's fear. Sarai agreed to the plan, and when they entered Egypt, disaster struck. Genesis chapter 12, verses 14 and 15 say, "When Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that Sarai was a very beautiful woman. And when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace." It wasn't just random men noticing Sarai. Pharaoh's own officials, the highest-ranking men in Egypt, saw her and were so impressed they went straight to the king and told him about this beautiful woman. Because everyone thought she was just Abram's sister and therefore available, she was taken into Pharaoh's palace. The most powerful man in Egypt now had Sarai, planning to make her his wife. Everything God promised was now in jeopardy. And what about Abram? Genesis chapter 12, verse 16 says, "He treated Abram well for her sake, and Abram acquired sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants and camels." Abram was getting rich off his lie. Pharaoh showered gifts on him, livestock, servants, camels, all valuable possessions. Abram was safe, alive and wealthy, but his wife was in another man's palace, about to become another man's wife. But God, these are the most important words, but God intervened. Genesis chapter 12, verse 17 says, "But the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai." God sent plagues, serious diseases on Pharaoh and everyone in his house. God was protecting his plan and his promises even though Abram had failed. God was being faithful even when his servant wasn't. Pharaoh realized something was terribly wrong and discovered the truth. Genesis chapter 12, verses 18 and 19 show his angry response. "So Pharaoh summoned Abram. 'What have you done to me?' he said. 'Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say, she is my sister, so that I took her to be my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go.'" Think about how shameful this was. A pagan king who worshipped false gods was rebuking God's chosen man for lying and deception. Pharaoh had every right to be furious. He could have executed Abram, imprisoned him, or taken everything he owned. But instead, he just wanted them gone from his land. Genesis chapter 12, verse 20 concludes, "Then Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men, and they sent him on his way, with his wife and everything he had." Pharaoh assigned men to escort them out, both for protection and to make sure they actually left. Abram left Egypt with Sarai safely returned, all his possessions and all the wealth he had gained from Pharaoh. He was physically safe and financially better off than when he arrived. But he also left with something else, a painful lesson carved deep into his memory. His lie had almost destroyed everything God promised. His fear had put the entire plan of God at serious risk. His attempt to save himself through deception had backfired completely, and only God's direct intervention had rescued him from the catastrophic disaster he created. Faith means trusting God even when you're afraid, even when circumstances look dangerous, even when you can't see how things will work out. It means believing God will protect you without manipulating situations through lies and schemes. Abram's detour to Egypt revealed a weakness in his character that would surface again and would affect his family for generations to come. After leaving Egypt, Abram returned to Canaan with Sarai, Lot, and all their wealth. Genesis chapter 13, verses 1 and 2 tell us, "So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him." Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. They were no longer just nomads. They were rich with large flocks, herds, and many servants. But this wealth created a problem. Genesis chapter 13, verses 5 through 7 explain, "Now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. But the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abram's herders and Lot's. The Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land at that time. The servants who cared for the animals started fighting over grazing land and water. This ongoing conflict was happening in front of the pagan nations around them. Abram had to make a decision. He was older, the uncle, the leader. He could have told Lot what to do, but Abram chose generosity. Genesis chapter 13 verses 8 and 9 show his offer. So Abram said to Lot, "Let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left." Abram valued peace over his rights. He gave Lot first choice. Lot looked around and saw the Jordan Valley. Genesis chapter 13 verse 10 says, Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan toward Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. It was lush, green, and fertile. Genesis chapter 13 verse 11 tells us, "So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. The two men parted company. Lot took the best land. Abram got whatever was left." But Genesis chapter 13 verses 12 and 13 add, "Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord." Lot chose based on appearance, not considering spiritual danger. Lot's choice put him in danger. Genesis chapter 14, verses 1 and 2 introduce a war. At the time when Amraphel was king of Shinar, Arioch king of Elasar, Kedorlaomer king of Elam, and Tidal king of Goyim, these kings went to war against Bera, king of Sodom, Birsha king of Gomorrah, Shinab king of Admah, Shemeba king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela. 4 powerful eastern kings attacked 5 local kings. The invaders won and took everything. Genesis chapter 14 verses 11 and 12 say, "The 4 kings seized all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food. Then they went away. They also carried off Abram's nephew Lot and his possessions, since he was living in Sodom." Lot was captured as a prisoner of war. When Abram heard this, he acted immediately. Genesis chapter 14 verses 14 and 15 tell us, "When Abram heard that his relative had been taken captive, he called out the 318 trained men born in his household and went in pursuit as far as Dan. During the night, Abram divided his men to attack them, and he routed them, pursuing them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. Abram became a warrior. He gathered 318 trained fighters from his household, chased the armies north, launched a surprise night attack, and won decisively. Genesis chapter 14 verse 16 says, "He recovered all the goods and brought back his relative Lot and his possessions, together with the women and the other people." Abram rescued Lot and everyone else. Family mattered more than past disagreements. After the victory, 2 kings met Abram. Genesis chapter 14, verse 17 says, "After Abram returned from defeating Kedorlaomer and the kings allied with him, the king of Sodom came out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh. But first, someone else appeared." Genesis chapter 14, verses 18 through 20 tell us, "Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abram, saying, 'Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand.' Then Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. Melchizedek was king of Salem and priest of the true God. He blessed Abram and praised God for the victory. Abram gave him 10% of everything, recognizing his spiritual authority. Then the king of Sodom spoke. Genesis chapter 14, verse 21 says, "The king of Sodom said to Abram, 'Give me the people and keep the goods for yourself.' He offered to let Abram keep all the wealth, but Abram refused." Genesis chapter 14, verses 22 through 24 record his response. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, "With raised hand I have sworn an oath to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or the strap of a sandal, so that you will never be able to say, 'I made Abram rich.' I will accept nothing but what my men have eaten, and the share that belongs to the men who went with me." Abram wouldn't take anything from Sodom's wicked king. He didn't want this pagan ruler claiming he made Abram wealthy. His wealth would come from God alone. After these events, God spoke to Abram. Genesis chapter 15 verse 1 says, "After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. 'Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward.'" But Abram had a deep concern. Genesis chapter 15 verses 2 and 3 show his question. But Abram said, "Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus?" And Abram said, "You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir." Abram was getting older with no son. His servant would inherit everything. How could God's promises come true? God's answer was clear. Genesis chapter 15 verse 4 says, "Then the word of the Lord came to him, 'This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir.'" Then God showed him something beautiful. Genesis chapter 15 verse 5 tells us, "He took him outside and said, 'Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them.' Then he said to him, 'So shall your offspring be.'" God showed Abram the stars, thousands filling the night sky. "That's how many descendants you'll have," God said. Genesis chapter 15 verse 6 records Abram's response. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Abram believed God despite the impossibility, and God counted this faith as righteousness. Then God made a formal covenant. Abram prepared animals as instructed. Genesis chapter 15 verse 12 says, "As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. God put Abram to sleep and spoke about the future. His descendants would be enslaved for 400 years, but then freed." Genesis chapter 15 verse 17 describes what happened. When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. God himself passed between the pieces, but Abram didn't. This was one-sided. God alone would keep these promises. Genesis chapter 15 verse 18 records, "On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, 'To your descendants I give this land, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates.' And God defined exact boundaries. Time passed with no child. Sarai remained barren, so she developed a plan. Genesis chapter 16 verses 1 and 2 explain, "Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, 'The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her.' Abram agreed to what Sarai said. In ancient culture, a barren wife could give her servant to her husband, and the child would legally belong to the wife. Sarai was trying to help God fulfill his promise. It seemed logical and followed cultural norms. But it wasn't God's plan. Abram agreed without seeking God's guidance. Genesis chapter 16 verse 3 tells us, "So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife." 10 years had passed since arriving in Canaan. Their patience had run out. Genesis chapter 16 verse 4 shows the result. "He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Hagar got pregnant quickly. Once she knew she was carrying Abram's child, she became proud and looked down on Sarai. She could do what Sarai couldn't, give Abram a child. This created terrible conflict. Genesis chapter 16 verse 5 shows Sarai's reaction. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." Sarai was angry and blamed Abram, even though this was her idea. Abram wanted to avoid the conflict. Genesis chapter 16 verse 6 says, "Your slave is in your hands," Abram said. "Do with her whatever you think best." Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. Sarai treated Hagar harshly, and the pregnant woman ran away into the dangerous desert. In the desert, God found Hagar. Genesis chapter 16 verse 7 tells us, "The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur." God cared about this Egyptian servant girl. He saw her suffering and sent his angel to help her. Genesis chapter 16 verses 9 through 11 record the conversation. Then the angel of the Lord told her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." The angel added, "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "You are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery." God told Hagar to return and submit, though it would be difficult. But he also promised her numerous descendants. She would have a son named Ishmael, meaning God hears. God had heard her suffering. The angel also told her about Ishmael's character. Genesis chapter 16 verse 12 says, "He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers." Ishmael would be fierce, independent, and live in conflict with others. Hagar was amazed God saw her. Genesis chapter 16 verse 13 records, "She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her, 'You are the God who sees me.' For she said, 'I have now seen the one who sees me.' She called God the God who sees me." She, a lowly servant, had been noticed by God himself. Hagar returned. Genesis chapter 16 verses 15 and 16 tell us, "So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael." Abram now had a son at age 86. But Ishmael wasn't the fulfillment of God's promise. He was born from human planning, from impatience, from trying to help God instead of waiting. He was Abram's son, but not the son of the promise. 13 years passed in silence. Then when Abram was 99, God appeared again. Genesis chapter 17 verse 1 says, "When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, 'I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and be blameless.'" God introduced himself as God Almighty and renewed his covenant. Genesis chapter 17 verses 3 and 4 say, "Abram fell face down, and God said to him, 'As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations.'" Not just one nation, many nations. Then God changed his name. Genesis chapter 17 verse 5 records, "No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations." Abram became Abraham, father of many. The name change signaled a new identity and destiny. God gave more promises. Genesis chapter 17 verses 6 and 7 say, "I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for the generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you." This covenant would last forever through all generations. Then God gave a sign. Genesis chapter 17 verses 10 and 11 explain, "This is my covenant with you and your descendants after you, the covenant you are to keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You are to undergo circumcision, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and you. Circumcision would be the physical mark, showing they belonged to God's covenant people. Every male would be circumcised as a sign. God also changed Sarai's name. Genesis chapter 17 verse 15 says, God also said to Abraham, as for Sarai your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. Sarai became Sarah, princess. Then came the specific promise. Genesis chapter 17 verse 16 declares, I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her. This was the first time God explicitly stated the promised child would come through Sarah. Abraham laughed. Genesis chapter 17 verse 17 tells us, Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? Abraham laughed in disbelief. He was almost 100. Sarah was 90. This seemed medically impossible. Abraham suggested an alternative. Genesis chapter 17 verse 18 says, and Abraham said to God, if only Ishmael might live under your blessing. Abraham was saying, what about Ishmael? Can't he be the one? But God was firm. Genesis chapter 17 verses 19 through 21 record. Then God said, yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you by this time next year. God promised to bless Ishmael. He would become a great nation with 12 rulers. But the covenant would go through Isaac, the son not yet born. And Isaac would be born by this time next year. God gave a specific deadline. That day, Abraham obeyed. Genesis chapter 17 verses 23 and 24 tell us, on that very day, Abraham took his son Ishmael and all those born in his household or bought with his money, every male in his household, and circumcised them as God told him. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised, and his son Ishmael was 13. Abraham didn't delay. He circumcised himself at 99, Ishmael at 13, and every male in his household that same day. Later, Abraham sat at his tent entrance during the heat of the day. Genesis chapter 18 verses 1 and 2 say, the Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. 3 men suddenly appeared. Abraham showed them generous hospitality. Genesis chapter 18 verses 3 through 5 show his offer. He said, if I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat, so you can be refreshed and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant. Very well, they answered. Do as you say. Abraham offered water, shade, and food. The visitors accepted. Abraham hurried to prepare a feast, bread from finest flour, a choice calf, curds, and milk. He stood near them while they ate, ready to serve. Then one visitor asked a question. Genesis chapter 18 verse 9 says, where is your wife Sarah? They asked him. There in the tent, he said. The fact that they knew Sarah's name showed these weren't ordinary travelers. Then came the announcement. Genesis chapter 18 verse 10 records, then one of them said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife will have a son. Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. Sarah heard this from inside the tent. Genesis chapter 18, verses 11 and 12 tell us, Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I am worn out, and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure? Sarah laughed silently to herself, thinking it impossible. She was too old, her body worn out. Abraham was old. How could they have a baby now? But the Lord knew she laughed. Genesis chapter 18 verses 13 and 14 say, Then the Lord said to Abraham, Why did Sarah laugh and say, Will I really have a child, now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son. God asked the most important question, Is anything too hard for the Lord? Nothing is too difficult for God. If God promises something, He can do it, no matter how impossible it seems to human understanding. Sarah got scared because she realized these weren't ordinary visitors. Genesis chapter 18 verse 15 says, Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, I did not laugh. But he said, Yes, you did laugh. Sarah tried to deny it, but God knew the truth. She had laughed in disbelief at the promise, but soon her laughter of doubt would turn into laughter of joy when she held her miracle baby in her arms. God kept His promise. Exactly as He had said, at the precise time He specified, Sarah became pregnant. Genesis chapter 21, verses 1 and 2 tell us, Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah as He had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what He had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. This was a miracle. Sarah was 90 years old. Abraham was 100. They were way beyond normal childbearing age. But God had promised, and God kept His word at the exact time He specified. The baby boy was born, and Abraham did exactly what God had instructed. Genesis chapter 21 verses 3 and 4 say, Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, as God commanded him. Abraham named the baby Isaac, meaning he laughs. This name forever reminded them how both had laughed in disbelief when God promised this child. Now their laughter of doubt had turned to joy. Genesis chapter 21 verse 5 adds, Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. 100 years old, Abraham was becoming a father through Sarah at an age when most men would be great-grandfathers. Sarah's response was beautiful. Genesis chapter 21 verses 6 and 7 record, Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. Sarah was full of joy. God had brought her laughter, genuine, joyful laughter. Everyone who heard about this miracle would laugh with her in amazement. Who would have imagined she would nurse a baby at 90? Yet here she was, with Isaac. God had done the impossible. The baby grew normally. Genesis chapter 21 verse 8 tells us, The child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. Children were typically weaned around age 2 or 3. Abraham threw a big celebration to mark this milestone, a feast with food and joy. During this celebration, something happened that created tension. Genesis chapter 21 verse 9 says, But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking. Ishmael, now about 16 or 17, was mocking young Isaac. What exactly he did isn't specified, but it angered Sarah deeply. Sarah went to Abraham with a demand. Genesis chapter 21 verse 10 records, She said to Abraham, Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. Sarah wanted Hagar and Ishmael gone. She didn't want Ishmael sharing any inheritance with Isaac. This deeply distressed Abraham. Genesis chapter 21 verse 11 says, "The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son." Ishmael was Abraham's son too. The thought of sending them away was heartbreaking, but God spoke with guidance. Genesis chapter 21 verses 12 and 13 say, "But God said to him, 'Do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring." God told Abraham to listen to Sarah. The covenant would continue through Isaac, not Ishmael. However, God promised Ishmael would also become a nation because he was Abraham's son. The next morning, Abraham obeyed. Genesis chapter 21 verses 14 and 15 tell us. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. They wandered in the desert until the water ran out. The situation became desperate. Genesis chapter 21 verse 16 says, "Then she went off and sat down about a bowshot away, for she thought, 'I cannot watch the boy die.' And as she sat there, she began to sob." Hagar couldn't bear watching Ishmael die, so she sat at a distance and cried. But God heard them. Genesis chapter 21 verses 17 through 19 tell us, "God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, 'What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation.' Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God heard Ishmael's cries. An angel told Hagar not to fear. God would make Ishmael a great nation. Then God opened her eyes to see a well she hadn't noticed. She filled the water skin and gave Ishmael a drink. They were saved. Genesis chapter 21 verses 20 and 21 conclude, "God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. God stayed with Ishmael. He became skilled with the bow, lived in the desert, and married. God kept his promise to make Ishmael into a great nation. After these events, God tested Abraham. Genesis chapter 22 verse 1 says, "Some time later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, 'Abraham.' 'Here I am,' he replied. Then came the command that must have shattered Abraham's heart. Genesis chapter 22 verse 2 records, "Then God said, 'Take your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you.'" God told Abraham to take Isaac and sacrifice him as a burnt offering. This meant killing Isaac and burning his body on an altar. This seemed to contradict everything God had promised. How could Isaac have descendants if he was dead? But Abraham had learned to trust God. Genesis chapter 22 verse 3 tells us, "Early the next morning Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about." Abraham got up early the next morning. He didn't delay or argue. He gathered supplies and began the journey. Genesis chapter 22 verse 4 says, "On the 3rd day Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. 3 days of walking, knowing what God had commanded. When they could see the mountain, Abraham left the servants behind." Genesis chapter 22 verses 5 and 6 say, "He said to his servants, 'Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship and then we will come back to you.' Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife, as the 2 of them went on together." Notice Abraham said, "We will come back." He believed somehow they would both return. As they walked, Isaac asked a question. Genesis chapter 22, verses 7 and 8 record. Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father." "Yes, my son?" Abraham replied. "The fire and wood are here," Isaac said, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the two of them went on together. Isaac noticed they had everything except the animal to sacrifice. Abraham's answer was profound. God himself will provide. He trusted God would provide what was needed. They reached the place. Abraham built an altar and arranged the wood. Then came the hardest moment. Genesis chapter 22 verses 9 and 10 describe, when they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Abraham tied Isaac and laid him on the altar. Isaac, probably a young man, submitted to his father. Abraham picked up the knife and raised it, ready to obey God's command. But at that exact moment, God intervened. Genesis chapter 22 verses 11 and 12 say, "But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, 'Abraham, Abraham.' 'Here I am,' he replied. 'Do not lay a hand on the boy,' he said. 'Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son.'" An angel shouted from heaven. Abraham immediately responded. The angel told him to stop. Don't hurt Isaac. Abraham had proved his faith. He feared God so deeply that he was willing to give up his most precious possession because God asked. Then Abraham noticed something. Genesis chapter 22 verse 13 says, "Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son." God had provided a substitute. A ram was caught in a bush by its horns, right when Abraham needed a sacrifice. Abraham took the ram and sacrificed it instead of Isaac. Abraham named the place to remember. Genesis chapter 22 verse 14 records, "So Abraham called that place, 'The Lord will provide.' And to this day it is said, 'On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided.'" The angel called again with more promises. Genesis chapter 22, verses 15 through 18 say, "The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, 'I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me." God swore by himself to confirm his promises. Because Abraham hadn't withheld his son, God would bless him abundantly. His descendants would be countless and would conquer enemies. Through Abraham's offspring, all nations would be blessed. Genesis chapter 22 verse 19 concludes, "Then Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba." Abraham and Isaac returned to the servants together, just as Abraham had said. The test was over. Isaac was alive. God had provided. Years passed. Then came a day of sorrow. Genesis chapter 23 verses 1 and 2 tell us, Sarah lived to be 127 years old. She died at Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham went to mourn for Sarah and to weep over her. Sarah died at 127. She had seen the miracle son born and grow into a man. Abraham mourned deeply. They had been together through so many adventures. Now she was gone. Abraham had a practical problem. He didn't own land to bury Sarah. Genesis chapter 23 verses 3 and 4 show what he did. Then Abraham rose from beside his dead wife and spoke to the Hittites. He said, "I am a foreigner and stranger among you. Sell me some property for a burial site here so I can bury my dead." The Hittites responded generously. Genesis chapter 23, verses 5 and 6. Record. The Hittites replied to Abraham, "Sir, listen to us. You are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our tombs. None of us will refuse you his tomb for burying your dead." But Abraham had a specific place in mind. Genesis chapter 23 verses 7 through 9 say, "Then Abraham rose and bowed down before the people of the land, the Hittites. He said to them, 'If you will let me bury my dead, then listen to me and intercede with Ephron son of Zohar on my behalf, so he will sell me the cave of Machpelah, which belongs to him and is at the end of his field. Ask him to sell it to me for the full price as a burial site among you.'" Abraham wanted to buy the cave of Machpelah from Ephron. He wanted to pay full price. Ephron offered to give it free. Genesis chapter 23 verses 10 and 11 record, "Ephron the Hittite was sitting among his people, and he replied to Abraham in the hearing of all the Hittites who had come to the gate of his city. 'No, my lord,' he said, 'listen to me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of my people. Bury your dead.' But Abraham insisted on paying. Genesis chapter 23 verses 12 and 13 show his response. Again Abraham bowed down before the people of the land, and he said to Ephron in their hearing, 'Listen to me if you will. I will pay the price of the field. Accept it from me so I can bury my dead there.' Ephron named a price. Genesis chapter 23 verses 14 and 15 say, "Ephron answered Abraham, 'Listen to me, my lord. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver, but what is that between you and me? Bury your dead.' Abraham agreed immediately. Genesis chapter 23 verse 16 tells us, Abraham agreed to Ephron's terms and weighed out for him the price he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver, according to the weight current among the merchants. The transaction was completed publicly and legally. This was the first piece of the promised land Abraham actually owned. Genesis chapter 23 verses 19 and 20 conclude, "Afterward, Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre, which is at Hebron, in the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave in it were deeded to Abraham by the Hittites as a burial site. Sarah was laid to rest in the cave. Abraham had a permanent burial place in the land God promised. Time passed. Abraham was very old, and Isaac needed a wife. Abraham didn't want Isaac to marry a Canaanite. Genesis chapter 24, verses 1 through 4, show what he did. Abraham was now very old, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. He said to the senior servant in his household, the one in charge of all that he had, "Put your hand under my thigh. I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I am living, but will go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac." Abraham made his trusted servant take an oath. The servant had to find a wife for Isaac from Abraham's relatives, not from the Canaanites. The servant asked a practical question. Genesis chapter 24 verse 5 records, the servant asked him, "What if the woman is unwilling to come back with me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the country you came from?" Abraham was firm. Genesis chapter 24 verses 6 through 8 show his answer. "Make sure that you do not take my son back there," Abraham said. "The Lord, the God of heaven, who brought me out of my father's household and my native land, and who spoke to me and promised me on oath, saying, 'To your offspring I will give this land,' he will send his angel before you, so that you can get a wife for my son from there. If the woman is unwilling to come back with you, then you will be released from this oath of mine. Only do not take my son back there." Isaac must not leave the promised land. Abraham trusted God would send an angel to make the mission successful. Genesis chapter 24 verse 10 tells us, "Then the servant left, taking with him 10 of his master's camels loaded with all kinds of good things from his master. He set out for Aram Naharaim and made his way to the town of Nahor. Look, the servant took 10 camels with expensive gifts and traveled to Abraham's homeland. When he arrived, he prayed." Genesis chapter 24 verses 12 through 14 record, "Then he prayed, 'Lord, God of my master Abraham, make me successful today and show kindness to my master Abraham. See, I am standing beside this spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a young woman, "Please let down your jar that I may have a drink," and she says, "Drink, and I'll water your camels too. Let her be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac. By this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master." The servant asked God for a specific sign. He would ask a woman for water. If she offered to water all 10 camels too, she was the right one. This was significant because watering 10 thirsty camels required drawing many heavy jars, hard work showing kindness. Before he finished praying, the answer came. Genesis chapter 24 verses 15 through 20 tell us, "Before he had finished praying, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She was the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, who was the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. The woman was very beautiful, a virgin. No man had ever slept with her. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up again. The servant hurried to meet her and said, 'Please give me a little water from your jar.' 'Drink, my lord,' she said, and quickly lowered the jar to her hands and gave him a drink. After she had given him a drink, she said, 'I'll draw water for your camels too, until they have had enough to drink.' So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough, ran back to the well to draw more water, and drew enough for all his camels. Everything happened exactly as prayed. Rebekah was from Abraham's family. She gave him water and immediately offered to water all his camels. She worked hard until all 10 had drunk. This was exactly the sign requested. The servant gave her expensive gifts and asked whose daughter she was. She identified herself as Bethuel's daughter, Abraham's family. The servant worshipped God. Genesis chapter 24 verse 27 says, saying, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not abandoned his kindness and faithfulness to my master. As for me, the Lord has led me on the journey to the house of my master's relatives." Rebekah's family invited the servant in. He told the whole story and asked for their answer. They recognized God's hand. Genesis chapter 24, verses 50 and 51 show their response. Laban and Bethuel answered, "This is from the Lord. We can say nothing to you one way or the other. Here is Rebekah. Take her and go, and let her become the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has directed." They agreed. The next morning the servant wanted to leave immediately. They asked Rebekah if she would go. Genesis chapter 24 verse 58 records, "So they called Rebekah and asked her, 'Will you go with this man?' 'I will go,' she said. Rebekah agreed to go, trusting God's plan. They traveled back to Canaan. When they arrived, Isaac was in a field. Genesis chapter 24 verse 67 concludes, "Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death." Isaac married Rebekah, loved her, and found comfort after losing Sarah. God had provided the perfect wife through the servant's faithful obedience. After Isaac's marriage, Abraham lived many more years. He even remarried. Genesis chapter 25, verses 1 and 2 tell us, Abraham had taken another wife, whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Abraham had 6 more sons through Keturah, but Abraham made sure Isaac remained the primary heir. Genesis chapter 25, verses 5 and 6 say, Abraham left everything he owned to Isaac, but while he was still living, he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines and sent them away from his son Isaac to the land of the east. Isaac received the main inheritance and covenant promises. The other sons received gifts, but were sent away to prevent conflicts. Then Abraham's time came. Genesis chapter 25 verses 7 and 8 tell us, Abraham lived 175 years. Then Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man and full of years, and he was gathered to his people. Abraham was 175 when he died. He died satisfied, having lived a long, full life. He had seen God's promises begin fulfillment. Abraham was buried beside Sarah. Genesis chapter 25 verses 9 and 10 say, his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre, in the field of Ephron son of Zohar the Hittite, the field Abraham had bought from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with his wife Sarah. Both Isaac and Ishmael came together to bury their father. He was laid to rest beside Sarah in the cave of Machpelah. Genesis chapter 25 verse 11 adds, after Abraham's death, God blessed his son Isaac, who then lived near Beer Lahai Roi. God's covenant continued through Isaac. The blessings flowed to the next generation. Abraham's legacy extended far beyond his lifetime. He became exactly what God promised, the father of many nations. Through Isaac came Israel. Through Ishmael came Arab nations. Through his other sons came additional peoples. His descendants became as numerous as stars and sand, exactly as God promised. But Abraham's greatest legacy was faith. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 8 says, by faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Abraham became the ultimate example of faith. He obeyed God's call without knowing the destination. He believed God's promise of a son when impossible. He trusted God enough to offer Isaac. His faith wasn't perfect. He made mistakes, but he kept trusting God. God's promise that through your offspring all nations will be blessed found ultimate fulfillment in Jesus Christ, who came from Abraham's line. Through Jesus, people from every nation could be blessed. Abraham's faith became the model for all who follow God. Romans chapter 4 verse 3 says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Faith, not works, makes someone right with God. Three major world religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, look back to Abraham as a spiritual father. Billions across thousands of years have been impacted by this one man who chose to believe and obey God. The promises God made didn't die when Abraham died. They continued through Isaac, Jacob, the 12 tribes, and ultimately through Jesus to all who believe. The covenant was eternal and remains active today. Abraham's life showed God keeps promises even when impossible. He showed real faith means trusting God when you can't see how things will work. He demonstrated obedience to God is worth more than comfort. And he proved one person walking with God can impact all human history. From to father of nations, that was Abraham's journey. From childless to countless descendants, that was God's faithfulness. From doubt to joy, that was faith's transformation. Abraham's legacy reminds us that when God makes a promise, nothing stops it from coming true. If this story of faith, miracles, and God's faithfulness inspired you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button so you won't miss more incredible Bible stories that bring these ancient accounts to life. Share this video with your friends and family. Everyone needs to hear how Abraham's faith shaped the world we live in today. Drop a comment below and let us know. What part of Abraham's story impacted you the most? Was it his obedience when God called him? The miraculous birth of Isaac, or his willingness to offer his son on Mount Moriah? Remember, Abraham's God is still the God of the impossible. Whatever promises you're waiting for, whatever seems too hard to believe, whatever giants you're facing, the same God who turned Abraham's laughter of doubt into laughter of joy is with you today. Keep believing, keep trusting, keep walking by faith, and watch what God will do. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.